Today, Thursday, 3rd of March, we have another session of Media Cafe. And today we are going to talk about media visas and freedom without borders. We have two distinguished guests with us today. Mr. Jonathan Head of the BBC and also previous president of the FCCT and presently still board member of FCCT. And on my right here is Kun Supalak Kanjana Kundi, regional editor of the Nation newspaper, who is responsible for international news report for the Nation for over 20 years now. So Jonathan also for a long time covering the region, hop out to Turkey for a while and then back here again at critical time, interesting time. Okay, we will start by looking at the current situation, which there's this new regulation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs asking or being strict on giving media visas for journalists working in Thailand or those who are based in Thailand and working for the region. So this is going on maybe perhaps after the military coup in 2014 and getting stricter and stricter. So we'll hear from Jonathan Head first and then we'll hear from Kun Supalak. What are the problems created by the regime and why?
I've been talking a great deal about this issue for the last few weeks, rather more than I expected. These guidelines that came from the Foreign Ministry were a surprise to us. They were given to us at very short notice, but it's obvious that the Foreign Ministry has been thinking about them for some time. I'll start by first saying Thailand is the natural hub for journalists who want to cover this region. I mean, Thailand is the natural hub for ASEAN. Its geographical position makes it an obvious place to be if you're a businessman or a journalist covering this entire Southeast Asian region. And those advantages exist regardless of whether you have a democratic government or a military government. Journalists will want to be here. There is nowhere else that can rival Thailand as an ideal base. You've got very good flight connections. You have a country where there is already a very important political story, a country with a history of being very friendly to foreign journalists. Bangkok's a very easy place for foreigners to live, and with important countries on its borders. There really is nowhere else that can rival Thailand. I know there are people who've left Thailand and thought about being based elsewhere, and it always comes back to Thailand being the place to be. And it's something I think that Thailand should be proud of. This is it shows what a globally friendly country this is, how connected to the rest of the world. And I believe that the very large number of foreign journalists who based themselves here really for the last 30, 40 years has actually enhanced Bangkok's reputation as a global city, and it has also enhanced the enormous profile that Thailand has on the world stage. I mean, this is an enormously popular place for tourists to come. It's been an enormously popular destination for foreign investment for many decades, and I believe that the very large foreign media presence has enhanced that attraction to outsiders. And it's something I would hope that even the current government, with its inevitable differences with the media, would understand that there is a real value to having these journalists here. In fact, I would argue that a government that is inevitably criticized for its infringements of human rights and media freedom should be grateful that with this very strong foreign media presence, they can go out and say, look, if we were that bad, would all these foreign journalists be here? It's something they should still be proud of and something they could actually use to their advantage. We first became aware of problems of foreign media accreditation about a year ago when individual journalists came to us. I was then president of the Foreign Correspondents Club and started telling us they were having problems that they'd never encountered before. And some of these journalists had lived here for 10, 20 years. The problems ranged from very, very slow processing. They found there were new staff at the Foreign Ministry who were much more aggressive and hostile, that the interviewing was much tougher, that they were being asked to provide far more documents than they had in the past before they could get their M visa, and some of them were being rejected and told, we do not consider you a journalist, you do not get an M visa, go and find another one. At the time, I attempted to establish some kind of communication with the Foreign Ministry to try to understand what was going on. And frankly, I got nothing. We tried very hard to get the Foreign Ministry to communicate with us, and they did not seem willing to do that. And the people whose visas had been rejected, when they asked for the reason, were told it was classified information, they couldn't know. And some of the stories were just bizarre. I've got emails from these people. It baffles me as to what the Foreign Ministry thought it was doing. Finally, about a month and a half ago, just over a month ago, when a well-known cartoonist had his visa rejected and it got a huge amount of coverage on social media, I was contacted for the first time in a year, really, by the Foreign Ministry, who asked for a meeting. And in that meeting, at the beginning of last month, Kun Sek from the Information Department of the Foreign Ministry handed me these guidelines. He said, we've been thinking about new guidelines, here they are. And I looked at them, and we at the FCCT, we were very concerned about these guidelines, about the way they were written. They were confusing, some of the language was alarming, some of the requirements were frankly absurd. I mean, one of them was that journalists based here have to report mostly on Thailand, and we said that just doesn't work. This is a regional hub. People report on Thailand when there's news, but many people here report on the whole region. I will give them credit, they were willing to discuss with us the guidelines, and they invited 4 senior board members, including myself, to have a long meeting one morning at the Foreign Ministry to go through our concerns about the guidelines. And they did take on board a few of our recommended changes. But I would say about these guidelines, they're still badly written. They're still confusing. If you read them, it's not entirely sure what they mean. And we are still not sure what the overall intention of these guidelines is. And they were also introduced with very little notice. We were handed these guidelines and we were told they were going to be finalized the next week. There was very little time for any real thinking. And we think this is a big mistake. The Foreign Ministry, they're not journalists. They would have been well advised, frankly, to have a longer period of consultation with the media. But our biggest concern is, what is the goal of these guidelines? The Foreign Ministry promised us, and they keep saying this, the goal is not to censor or intimidate journalists. This has nothing to do with media freedom, they say. And most of the journalists who had their visas rejected are not political journalists. They are people, you might say, on the fringes of mainstream journalism. Feature writers, travel writers, freelance photographers. Freelancers in particular appear to be targeted, to be rejected. People who don't have well-known employers. And so our impression from what they're doing is that they are not targeting journalists because of what they're writing about the military. That does not appear to be their goal. And yet, we've had 3 separate messages from the Foreign Ministry that completely conflict with each other. What they told us was there are now more than 500 people on M visas living in Thailand, that they are required by the military to scrutinize journalists more than in the past, and this is too much work for them. What they told us, we don't have enough people, we have to cut down the number, we can't cope. But then they said they don't want to reduce by more than 10%, maybe just 50 journalists. With over 500, I don't see that 50 journalists is going to make a big difference, and that didn't strike me as a very convincing reason. Then they said to us that they were getting complaints from Thai journalists who said that they thought there were foreigners out there who had M visas who were not really journalists. Now, on that issue, we said, we agree with you. We do not want people who are not journalists getting M visas, and we completely sympathize if you want to scrutinize more thoroughly to make sure that the people you're giving accreditation to are genuine journalists. But actually, that's quite easy. Just ask those journalists to provide evidence that they are doing media work regularly through the year. 5 pieces of published work, for example, or if you're a producer, some pieces that you've worked on, if you're in a TV company. They haven't taken that advice. They still want to categorize. They say, no, we're saying we don't think freelance photographers should get M visas. And we said, look, freelance photographers, most photographers are freelance now. There are very few staff photographers. And they're an essential part of the media world. You can't say they're not journalists. So is it because they think people are getting M visas who shouldn't? Or is it because they want to reduce the workload? Then we have a statement from the foreign minister, Kundon, who says, actually, we're targeting journalists who are writing misleading reports about Thailand that are damaging. So he gives the impression, in fact, what they're really doing is they're going after critical journalists. That's a very worrying statement. That implies, yes, it's exactly about media censorship. Now, I don't know which of these intentions is their goal, but what they're doing, it seems to me, is negative all round for Thailand. First of all, the way it's been done has given people the impression that they are cracking down on foreign media because they criticize the military. Even if that's not what they intended, that's the impression they're given because it has been so poorly communicated and done in such a rush. So there's been a huge amount of media coverage, everyone saying the Thai government is cracking down on foreign journalists because they don't like their reporting. I mean, that is just very poor public relations. If their goal is genuinely to reduce the number of journalists, foreign journalists based in Thailand, why? Why not take pride in it? You know, they keep talking about Thailand being a hub for ASEAN, a natural place. They want people to base themselves here, to operate in this fantastic region of 10 countries and 620 million people. Then surely you should be encouraging journalists. That's where journalists want to be. What is the purpose of trying to reduce something that actually is a benefit to Thailand? And, you know, so we are completely confused about what their real goal is. And because they are not making a convincing case to us as to why they're doing it, we worry that there is another agenda here. You know, it's no secret that the military government is unhappy with a lot of foreign media coverage. General Prayut makes it very clear himself. He doesn't like a lot of the coverage. He's very frustrated by it. And it's quite probable that the foreign ministry is getting some pressure to manage journalists better. We don't really know, they're not saying that, but it seems to me that may be the goal, and it's possible the foreign ministry is doing this just to be able to show the government that they're doing something without actually attacking well-known journalists from big companies like me. I don't know, it's not what they're saying, but that's my guess. But it's a very, very confused message. And one other thing I think that they really must take into account. A lot of the journalists that they're rejecting now for M visas have lived in Thailand for a very long time. If they're freelance photographers, life is pretty tough for them now. You know, the whole media world is a much tougher environment to work in, there's much less money, and some people who've been doing it for a long time living here have much less secure income than they did. Many of them used to be staff photographers or staff writers and are now freelancers. When you then go and say to them, right, we're rejecting the visa that you've had for the last 20 years, you've got 3 months to find an alternative, that throws their life into complete disarray. They might be married, they might have homes here, all their stuff is here, they're settled here, they've lived for a long time expecting to get a visa, and suddenly they're told they cannot get one. They've got 3 months. They might get an alternative visa, they might not. You apply for a B visa, how long is it going to take? You might only find out with 1 month of your grace period left that you're not going to get a B visa either. You've got 1 month to find another country to live in after 20 years. I mean, this is not, it's actually inconsiderate of the foreign ministry to ram this through like this. So for all sorts of reasons, these are very badly thought through guidelines with a very unclear intention that it seems to me have been unnecessarily negative for us, the foreign media community, and frankly for the reputation of Thailand. The one good thing I would say is the willingness of the foreign ministry to engage with the Foreign Correspondents Club is very positive, and we do hope that we can keep up a dialogue with them to discuss the overall guidelines, which we think should be and could be improved, and also to know what their real intention is, and for us to be able to lobby on behalf of people that we think should not be rejected, should still get M visas. And some of those who've come to me in distress, having had their visas rejected, are quite clearly journalists. You know, in fact, of all the people who've contacted me in the last 2 months since these guidelines came up, every one of them is doing some form of clearly recognizable media work. If there are people out there who are absolutely not journalists, they're I don't know, running a hotel or running a bar or something else, and they've got an M visa. I completely support the right of the Foreign Ministry to reject their visas. We don't want people masquerading as journalists. But I haven't come across these people yet. And all the people who've come to me with problems, their visas being rejected, are all bona fide journalists. And I would urge the Foreign Ministry too to consider that the media has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And their ideas about what's a legitimate journalist are really very old-fashioned. Not many journalists now work for a big, recognized, registered news agency, as they put in their guidelines. The majority of foreign journalists don't work for that kind of organization. Many of them are freelancers and work for many different clients. That is the nature of the media now. That's the reality. And the Foreign Ministry needs to understand that. In their guidelines, they haven't even considered videographers. There aren't many stills photographers now who can make a living. Most of them do quite a lot of video is now far more common than just stills work. And the Foreign Ministry seems to be unaware these people even exist. And those videographers do a huge variety of work. Some news work, some feature work, a bit of commercial work, work for NGOs like the UN. That's how they work. That's the nature of the business. That is media work in the 21st century. They are media workers, and they deserve M visas. And just one other point. An M visa gives a foreign journalist the right to get a press pass from the Public Relations Department. So if you deprive a journalist of an M visa and they get a B visa, it's unclear whether they would get this press pass. And take, for example, if you're a sports reporter. The Foreign Ministry says, we don't think sports reporters are journalists. And this is ridiculous. Of course sports reporters are journalists. Which other country doesn't think that somebody who writes about sport is not a journalist? But that's their view. But a lot of the big sporting events require you to produce a press pass to be able to attend them. So these people whose lives are writing for very well-known publications like Golf Monthly or whatever, football magazines or whatever, how are they going to cover it? Now, the Foreign Ministry said, oh, well, in that case, if those people are doing media work, they must still get a B visa, but we will lobby for them with the PRD to get them a press pass. Well, that's a whole lot of work. So you make the journalists go through a whole lot more work to get their visa, and then you, at the Foreign Ministry, have to go through a whole lot of work telling the PRD, no, he doesn't have an M visa, but yes, we think he should get a press pass. I mean, it just seems unnecessarily convoluted and very unclear what it's trying to achieve. And we are very concerned that people who have been doing genuine journalist work may not be able to get press passes now. And you often need press passes, for example, if you're a foreign journalist based here applying for a media visa in somewhere like India or Pakistan. They want to see you're a journalist. You say, oh, well, I'm a journalist, here's my employer. They say, where's your visa? Oh, well, I'm on a B visa. Where's your press pass? I don't have one. Oh, you won't get a visa then. I mean, none of this has been thought through by the Foreign Ministry. And I think it's essential that they're willing to sit down with us at the FCC, be clear with us what they're trying to achieve. The three things, explanations they've given conflict with each other. They don't make sense. What is it they want to do? Do they want to reduce the number of journalists? We think that's a bad idea. Do they want to stop people who are not journalists getting M visas? We think that's a good idea and we'll help them with that. Do they want to deal with journalists who are critical of Thailand? That's a disastrous strategy, frankly. It's going to get them terrible publicity. Because Thailand is a natural hub, people will always be based here unless they make it completely hostile. I don't think, do they want to turn Thailand into North Korea or even dare I say it, Vietnam? And Vietnam is a country where there's very, very tight control of the media. And for that reason, journalists, as a rule, don't base themselves there. And it's not something, frankly, that Vietnam should be proud of. And it's not something that Thailand should want to emulate. And I very much hope they don't want to.
What are the recommendations that FCCT made that have been accepted by MOF regarding the guidelines or outside the guidelines?
The only two changes that they accepted were that they accepted you could not have a clause saying that journalists had to report mainly on Thailand or even substantially on Thailand. We said you just cannot tell journalists. If they don't know, if they're news journalists, they could be covering Thailand on a big year. It might be 80% of their reporting. In a quiet year, it might be 10% if they're a regional journalist. And they did agree to take that out. All they put in is that you must do some reporting on Thailand, which frankly, we don't think that's necessary, but that's an improvement. They also agreed not to write down rigid categories of people who would no longer get M visas. We said, how do you categorize people? They put down freelance photographers, leisure, sports, religion, fashion as categories that would not get M visas. And we said, well, you know, the issue about leisure and tourism was interesting. You know, they want tourism writers. And because we said all these categories of people you're rejecting are the very people who do the nicest coverage of Thailand. These are people, you know, the fashion writers and the sports journalists. This is the coverage that you and your now military masters want to see. This is all the nice stuff. They said, well, we do want tourist reporters. They'll get M visas. I said, what is the difference between a leisure, somebody who writes on leisure, and somebody who writes on tourism? They're kind of the same thing. So they did agree that those categories were far too rigid and narrow, and they took them out. But we would have preferred, to be honest, to start from scratch again with them and help them to write clearer guidelines and, you know, rephrase some of the slightly convoluted statements there and make it a bit more relevant to journalism as it is today, the profession of the 21st century. They came to us very late. They'd already written them and he gave me the guidelines the first time I'd seen them, and he said, we're introducing them next week. So we scheduled another meeting 2 days later, and we had one meeting with them. It was a long, 2-hour-long meeting. It was quite a robust conversation to start with. There was some quite heated exchanges, but it was very constructive after that. And, you know, they genuinely listened, and we listened to them. But I still feel the guidelines they've come up with are not well thought through, are not clear, and could be much better written. And again, the fundamental problem with them is that they're not making it clear what their real objective is. And because they've not been clear, and because they're badly written, they've given everybody the impression that in fact they are trying to crack down on critical journalists. They've promised me that's not the case, and all the journalists who've come to me so far who've had their visas rejected are people who are not writing about politics. So if you look at the people who are being rejected, it appears that the MFA is being sincere. They are not going after critical journalists, not yet. So in that way we're encouraged. But if they're not going after critical journalists, why is the foreign minister coming out saying we're going after critical journalists? My own hunch, and it's only a hunch, but I suspect this is true, is that the NCPO probably is putting pressure on the foreign ministry and complaining and saying, why are you giving more than 500 people M visas and we're getting all this negative coverage? You know, you should be doing more to control the foreign media. So it seems to me the MFA does not want to attack critical journalists like me, because that would give them very bad publicity. And in fact, they're going after journalists who are in a very soft area, but that they can then go back to the military and say, hey, you know, we reduced the number of foreign journalists by 50 this year, in the hope that that satisfies the military that they're doing something about it. So the foreign minister is telling people they're going after journalists, foreign journalists who write, you know, misleading reports, critical reports. But in fact, what they're doing is going after the easy journalists, the ones who have no big organizations to back them up, the ones who are freelancers. You know, I'm not sure, frankly, that's a lot better. I mean, that means you're ruining people's lives who are much more vulnerable. They don't have a big organization behind them. Many of them don't earn a lot of money. That's, you know, frankly, I don't think that's very good for Thailand either. But the fact is, we don't know. They're being confusing in signaling their intentions, and they frankly brought on a public relations disaster on their own heads by being deliberately confusing about what the objective is, and by communicating these guidelines in such a poor way.
How many have been rejected so far that you know of?
From last year, I knew of more than 10 for sure who were rejected, who had problems with their visas, who came to us directly. Since the guidelines were announced, we've had at least another 10 who've come to me and told me that their visas have been rejected. All of them are, every single one of them is a journalist doing some kind of media. In my view, they are journalists, media workers. I mean, in one case, one is a photographer who has worked for many, many years in Thailand and done some amazing, you know, investigative work, but is now doing a lot more media training. He still does some photographic assignments. He's doing a lot of teaching of journalism, you know, but he's still a journalist. He has been a journalist for a long time. Whether he can get a B visa or not, I don't know. He's lived here for, you know, more than 20 years. So, yeah, the numbers are as far as we can tell, seem to fit what the foreign ministry is saying, that they want to reduce by about 50. But we can't tell. It's been quite a lot in the last 4 to 5 weeks.
Has FCCT received the new version of the guideline?
Yeah, we received that new version pretty immediately after our meeting we met the Foreign Ministry at the beginning of last month, and then we got a copy of the guidelines the day before, the afternoon before they were officially published. So we could look at them then, and to be honest, we were disappointed.
Final one for this. How is it related to getting a work permit? Because you need the work permit along with the M visas.
The Foreign Ministry has made the point to us, and it's a reasonable point. They say an M visa is a privilege, because when you have a Foreign Ministry letter giving you accreditation and you have an M visa, it speeds up the process of getting a work permit and getting what we all need generally, which is a multiple entry year-long visa, so that we can live in Thailand but we can travel in and out, which in my case, you might do 20 times a year, maybe even more. It is a privilege, and we recognize that. If you have to go for a B visa, the process of getting a work permit is harder. You've got to show far more details about the business you're working for. It requires far more details about tax payments, you need often to have a certain amount of money in the bank. To be honest, talking to people who get B visas but are doing something related to media work, their experiences are very varied. Some people, it's quite easy. They get it routinely every year. They just pay the equivalent of about $200. Other people have found it very difficult. And at least one case of an M visa person I know, he applied for a B visa and he didn't get it. It was rejected. So the B visa is a very broad category that includes people who've got businesses here based in Thailand, and they have to give details of that, or who are doing business but don't have a company based here, or doing some other kind of work. It's a very, very broad category, and it's not clear to us yet, and we're still trying to find out how or what a journalist has to do to be sure of getting a B visa. It's a very unknown process for us, but it's certainly more unpredictable and requires more documentation that for some freelance journalists may be more difficult to get.
Thank you very much. Now we turn to Kun Supalak and hear his view, a view from the Thai side of journalists. I'm going to ask you two things. One, what is the reason behind this sort of guideline? Was it something similar to many coups that we had before? Has it an experience for foreign journalists here in Thailand? And secondly, as a regional journalist, would you compare the experiences you have with other countries in the region treating foreign reporters? Please.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Good morning. I don't involve in that kind of requesting visa for my own country, Thailand, but happen to involve this kind of what Jonathan has said, because actually before the case of STEP, another case years ago, since the first coup in 1926, and a Korean journalist happened to ask to me, as you know that I quite close to the foreign ministry, he said that he got a problem with a visa. What problem? The problem happened because he wrote something related to the monarchy, and they were just published in Korea, and Thai embassy in Seoul that translated and sent that report back to Bangkok and just blacklist this man because he writes very critical on the Thai monarchy. So there's the first one I even to know that, well, somebody has problem with the foreign ministry and authority who issued that journalist visa for journalists, foreign journalists in Thailand. In that case, I talked personally to the official who handled the case and said that what's the problem, why this come to, because previously we don't have this kind of problems. Foreign journalists are free in Thailand. You can do everything. You can write anything. You can whatsoever that. And it's never heard anything that in our country, even you criticize the monarchy, the government or whatsoever that in Thailand. So it's why I'm coming to the case. Um, the answer then is that, well, the foreign ministry get the pressure from, established elites and military or whatsoever that to be restrict that the foreign ministry, as they said, has a duty to illustrate the good image of Thailand. So whatsoever you can do to control flow of the information about Thailand, this is your job to do. That's why the idea to control that journalist visa has come up since then. I cannot solve that case for my friend. Actually, we are very close friends. One possible advice is that, okay, you apply the visa with another agency if you can, because that time we got from Indonesia. Okay, you are Korean, of course, but you work for the Indonesians. This is our ASEAN colleague. There's no problem. We can allow it. Finally, he got that and worked for the Indonesian organization for quite some time, and now he turned back to his own organization. Actually, there's no problem. As long as he doesn't write anything about the monarchy, or if you want to write something about monarchy, put another name. That's a way that we can handle. For step case, it's come to me. It's not supposed to come to me because I'm not responsible for the op-ed page or cartoons. But sometimes he ask my opinion what happened. This is appropriate because a step cartoon is mostly very provocative and sensitive. Sometimes on the very various issue. And I talked to Kun Sek. What happened? Well, he worked for us for a long time. Well, Kun Sek just happened to try to not to say directly and say, well, we don't know. You said you don't know step right for nation. You didn't read nation? I said, yeah, very, but he didn't supply any of his work when he applied for the visa. Renew, actually, not the new apply. It's the renew of his visa. I said, well, look, I think you know that he worked for that. What said talk to me that it is a new requirement to you have to submit your work about Thailand as well, but step submit all of his work about Middle East, not Thailand. For that, so that's why okay, fine. If you that's a case, I will tell step 2. Okay, you submit that anything about Thailand you wrote about. But first step concern is that anything he wrote in his cartoon about Thailand is all negative. So he just worried. Oh, probably he cannot get that visa if he supply that to the foreign ministry. At the end, okay, we consider this problem. We ask our boss, Kun Pana, just write us a letter to the foreign ministry to recommend that this is our cartoonist. He's a freelance, of course, but he wrote for us for years, so there's no problem. So the step case is so in that way. And I further ask, what really happened behind the thing that you are thinking? Why you just happen come to control the foreign media by this time? Didn't say anything directly about that. Just say, it's not your concern, probably because you're Thai journalist. He said he will talk to Jonathan, who quite closely consult. I don't know whether it's true. Quite close consult to yourself before having a new regulation. But finally, the regulation come out, and well, it's very clear when Jonathan may give an interview to our journalist who was the case. I happen to know that this is a case of the political attitudes, which would be a judgment for the foreign ministry to issue the visa to anybody. This kind of regulation probably done written clearly in the paper, but isn't when you come to have to what you think about the junta, what you think about our monarchy. It's not a question for asking the journalists who apply for visa. I think I never have any kind of experience when I apply visa for the other countries, asking about what I think about the Obama or the others. It's never happened, even in Laos. But what the foreign ministry did is pushing Thailand over downgrade itself to be the same category with other authoritarian states in Southeast Asia that I want to talk to today. That's my point. Is that around the same time, Laos has issued a new decree, Prime Minister order actually, saying that Laos now open for foreign journalists to temporarily or permanently set up their office in Laos, but on only one condition is pretty clearly you have to submit your prescript before publications. That's very. I say okay, fine. I don't need to apply to set up our office in Vientiane. It's so expensive. I better set up in Nong Khai if I need. Fine, but the problem is, Laos also use this kind of visa to control media. My experience is because I talk to Laos because this is my favorite countries of coverage. I always cover Laos. The previous time I was rejected, but it's rejected generally. I'm not upset about that. That's smart. It's the party congress. I apply to cover party congress. Usually they open for foreign journalists to cover that. In the last minute, the letter from the foreign ministry, that information department, saying that, my dear Supalak, because we know each other. It is very sorry to say that this time we cannot welcome the foreign journalists. It's not confirmed that we to facilitate foreign journalists. Okay, not only me. This also Reuters and AFP also. We have no access to the Party Congress this time. I applied newly, so that's why I have to caution when speaking about this country. Laos gonna have a general election in 20 of March, so I also applied to cover. Actually, well, general election in Laos is not really a general election, but it's just an election. But as a journalist, I think we have something to find out, and maybe some colorful story to say about that, how the Communist Party have run the elections. Okay, I used to cover this kind of things that happen, but this time maybe another strict rule. I don't know whether they really need or really mean that to submit our prescripts before publication. Hopefully not. I never believe that Laos can do. Sometimes they might do. They ask personally, but as a friend. So because it's official who deal with us always under pressure, right? Sometimes okay, you go with that journalist. I don't have to very because I know minister. I know the DG, I know I work with them. So, oh, you know that our boss is rich. I know you. So, sometimes I need your copy. Also, what I have to, and I can give you just only the post publication. Where I can link my story to you if you like to see what I wrote about your country. Okay, submit to your boss. That's no problem. That's what I can do. This case happen always in Laos. It always happens. This system is almost similar, actually the same with Vietnam. I also need to apply for Thai people. We are free. I mean, visa free. We can actually, as an ASEAN member, we can freely go to Vietnam. But for journalists, it's different. You need to submit your request. For covering something whatsoever, that you have to write clearly who you will interview and who will you meet and where will you go and how many days you will be in this kind of operation before they grant your permission and you can go and get accreditation there in Hanoi. But Vietnam might be better in Laos probably because they don't ask the submitter of the prescript before publication. Sometimes they request also, I like to see what you wrote. Okay, you get it. I link you from the internet. You can access to my newspaper. No problem about that. That's fine. Or sometimes they get trouble with some wording I use or some view or some perspective, and like to clarify. Okay, fine. If you want to clarify, I will clarify this for you. This is a deal we can handle with. Myanmar is different. Myanmar, I was blacklisted for 10 years. That's no secret. And that because I write something that about the border crash, and the experience in Myanmar is different from the other side of the Mekong River. In Myanmar, I used to use various kind of visa, even sometimes no visa to that countries. Usually, we need to send our letter to the information ministry to ask permission to go to your country to cover. I mean, as a journalist, if they agree, that you don't know whether they will agree or not agree to accept you as a journalist because they never communicate with you until they get permission from the higher authorities. Like previous time, I already get excited and waiting for a visa for coverage of the election because I already applied a bit long ago. It's quiet, and write email again. It's still quiet until the last minute. Say, okay, you get it. I go to the embassy tomorrow. I get your visa tomorrow. Usually, it's a very short notice. If you don't prepare in advance, you never get in. And they're very strict. You have to go on board time, and you go to Yangon and go to the foreign media club something and get your equity there. Blah 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 blah. And you have to say where you go and where to cover and who people you will talk with. Previously in Myanmar, they're different. It's totally different from this. They will outside there people from usually from Myanmar News Agency to go with you when you go whatever you go. I got to use. I get a good friend because working there. A friend of mine now is in exile already. That people, that official actually go with you everywhere and arrange the interview for you. Whoever you want to interview, you have to go with this man. Luckily, they don't put their question in my question. That's only one point. That's good point. The trick is you have to make friends with that official. Okay, let's make the deal. I will go somewhere that you should not know and you should not see and you should not even acknowledge about myself. For example, I previously before my backlist, I arranged a meeting with the SNLD party, but that time I go on the permission of the information ministry, and I made a deal with the official who come to me. Later we already friend and close friend. I say, okay, I will go on the night time. You will go to bed before that, and I have to talk and finish it. And I will write any story while I was in Myanmar. I will go back to my home and write and pretend to be as we met in Bangkok. Under you don't know about that. Okay, fine. That's it. Can be happen. This is a trick to survive or work in that kind of condition. The country that I found is among freest, even freer than my own country is Cambodia. I don't know that regulation actually. I used to go on and off, in and out in that countries without any recognition or sometimes recognition of the official along the border sometimes. Even today, they have the systematics for regulating some kind of information. We don't, journalists don't need any visa for coverage. Short-term period. If you set up your office in Phnom Penh, you need some permission, right? But for coverage, I think we don't need. I never apply. Sometimes I request an interview with the official. They don't ask me about what kind of visa you are carrying. No, it's just okay. Come up. If you have something to talk with me, that's no problem. That because I think Cambodia is familiar with a kind of anarchy, so they cannot control anything. They try to control. The way they handle the foreign media is just they had set up the rapid response unit under the Prime Minister office. Whenever you wrote something wrong or not even wrong, but they don't like it, they will have this kind of qualification, quick qualification, or even a phone call to you directly. Oh, Mr. Suparak, we are sorry to say that your story is not appreciated. Our Prime Minister Hun Sen. Fine. But at least they don't blacklist me. I still can go. Okay, Kyokanalist, our friend, we can go. Yeah, every time I can go and talk to you. No problem. This is a thing that happen. I have no other experience in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, or Malaysia. I was there only for the ASEAN coverage that we have to register as the journalist for coverage this kind of special meeting. But the other things I love too, but sometimes covering something happened in southern Mindanao might be need something. But I don't know, the Philippines are a bit free in terms of coverage and news coverage. So in general, I found that after this regulation, I think Thailand is now joined the club of the other country that I mentioned earlier. Thank you. Malaysia, I also have no experience, direct experience in covering things because we the nation actually doesn't need to apply. When we assign me to go to Malaysia directly, we have a partner there, Star, which is already close to the government. They do it for us, and I sometimes just have a phone call to a friend, Stephen. Okay, what really happened? What is behind the scene? Just for the background. I had in Malaysia only for the ASEAN also that we need some other requirement.
I'll just add to that my experience, because I cover all of ASEAN, is that Malaysia is very easy to go and work there. They don't require any media visa. Journalists based there do have problems. I mean, the current government is being particularly tough on the media, and I would argue that Malaysia, in terms of restricting the media, is easily as bad as Thailand right now in terms of people based there. But if I'm going there, the climate is not easy to work in. Officials are very obstructive, not as easygoing as Thailand. When we were covering the problem with the migrant crisis last year, Thailand had much worse PR than Malaysia, although Malaysia was easily as responsible. But it was much easier for us to go and deal with Thai officials because everything they're so easygoing. You go down and this is one of the great joys about Thailand. Whatever the officials say at the top, everybody wants to talk to the media, and you can get around local officials by just getting to know them and chat to them and make them feel comfortable, even on a controversial subject. In Malaysia, officials are very frightened of getting into trouble, and they just block you at every time. Indonesia is a very easy place to work, except in certain places. Papua, for example, is a very difficult place to get permission to operate, and some far out places you may have difficulties with local officials. The one very negative side about Indonesia, and this is quite new, is Indonesia now insists that foreign journalists, certainly Western ones, but it may not apply to ASEAN journalists, have to get a media visa before they go, and it takes at least 2 weeks. And if you go without a media visa, they will, if they catch you, they will prosecute you and charge you. And we've had journalists who have been put in jail and held for quite a long time and given criminal prison sentences for trying to work there without a media visa. When we had the attacks in Jakarta back in January, where there were these sudden terrorist attacks there, we had to go at very short notice. And I flew to Indonesia. I was actually in Malaysia at the time, and my colleagues got hold of the former Indonesian ambassador here, Pat Lutfi, and my colleagues in Singapore spoke there and simply said, look, we have to cover this. Please don't arrest us. And they said, okay, you'll be okay this time. But it's a big restriction on covering Indonesia, that you have to apply for a media visa, and that it takes a long time to get it. Myanmar, interestingly, in my experience under the military government in the old days, was that many people were blacklisted, and if you were a journalist and they knew you were, in my case, I wasn't blacklisted, but I could only get a media visa, and after, for example, 2007 with the uprising, they refused to give any media visas. So during Cyclone Nargis, forget it. The only colleagues of mine who could go to Myanmar, I couldn't get a tourist visa. The whole time I lived in Thailand from the beginning of the end of the year 2000, 15 years ago, I could never get a tourist visa. I had to apply for a journalist visa, and they most often didn't give them. When they did give me a journalist visa, I mean, one famous occasion, I went to cover Prime Minister Thaksin's first visit in 2001. The Foreign Ministry in Thailand approved it. The Foreign Ministry in Myanmar didn't want to, but when the Prime Minister's office here said they'd approved it, they gave us a visa literally for 24 hours. And the Foreign Ministry people traveling with Thaksin were under orders literally to escort me and my cameraman back onto the plane. But usually when we were in Myanmar, we didn't have a minder, and you could kind of do what you wanted, except of course there were military intelligence everywhere. The situation now in Myanmar is you still need a visa. My experience is just like Kun Supalak. You send your application to Mint Jaw in Naypyidaw, nothing. You ask for a clarification, nothing. You phone his phone, nothing. And then suddenly an email comes, here's your visa approval. And yet usually it's 1 day notice, you rush in. But it is now, once you're in Myanmar, you might, in outlying areas, you may have problems. If you go to Rakhine State, they will check you very carefully and you might be restricted. But generally, it's quite a free place to operate. Cambodia, I agree, is very free. Vietnam, yes, is difficult. I mean, same experience as you. I was just operating in Vietnam for the Party Congress. We had a minder with us. Every single interview had to be approved. Everything has to be planned beforehand. Nothing can be spontaneous. And when I did what I thought some quite innocent commentary on the Congress, I was summoned to the foreign ministry and given a very, very strict telling off and a threat that they wouldn't cooperate. So, you know, I wouldn't go quite as far as Kun Supalak to say that Thailand has joined Laos and Vietnam as the really restricted places. This is still a good place to work. We still have enormous latitude. I'm worried about the direction it's going in. Thailand should be proud of the fact that it has been the best place to be a foreign journalist, and that in dealing with the media, it is generally very free. Even the deep south of Thailand, where you have a major military conflict, you don't need official permission to go there. You just need to chat to the military and go and see them. It's not, you know, they generally speaking, very, very easy about how we work here. But these foreign ministry guidelines send a very worrying signal. One is that they may be planning to restrict what foreign journalists report, although that hasn't happened yet. And the other is that they don't want to be a media hub anymore. And I think that's a terrible shame. Thailand should be proud of that. If their goal is just to restrict foreign journalists more and discourage them and reduce the numbers, how can that possibly help Thailand with its not just an aspiration to be a hub, a hub for business in ASEAN? It is a hub. This is Thailand's great strength. Its geographical position, its infrastructure, its tradition of openness to the outside world are enormous assets. And I know there's a lot of things have changed politically. The country is polarized. People are far more aware now because we are reporting more about Thailand than we used to do. When I first came 15 years ago, most of our reporting was outside Thailand, not in it. The events here mean we do report on Thailand, and because Thailand is very divided, our reporting gets scrutinized more, and a lot of Thais are very, very unhappy about it. And there's no surprise that the current military government doesn't like it. And I say, I talk to the NCPO whenever I can. I say to them, look, we're bound to disagree. You're a military government. You run things the way that you run things in the army. The army likes people, to obey orders and jump to attention. Journalists don't do that. Our job is to challenge you and question you, and even be a little bit insolent and to laugh at you when you do something silly. That is always going to be the job of the media, and you're always going to feel uncomfortable, and we understand that. But let's at least have a dialogue. And particularly, I don't think the foreign media coverage is really going to be that influential on what happens in Thailand in the next 5 years, or on the success of the military's plan to transform the country into some kind of, I don't know, perhaps Burmese-style discipline, flourishing democracy, whatever it is they're going to turn it into. Actually, the influence of foreign countries and foreign media is not that important. They probably shouldn't worry that much about us. They're always worrying about the image of Thailand. What they need is, well, yes, face is important, I know, but when you're thinking about foreign journalists, you have to take your face and put it back in the cupboard for a bit. It's a practical thing. Thailand has to be an open economy and an open country. That is its history. It's been the secret of its success. And part of that is going to be accepting a lot of foreign journalists here with the good and the bad. I mean, the fact is, I think it was Oscar Wilde, the famous Irish writer, who said that, the only thing worse than people not talking about you in a negative way is people not talking about you at all. Does Thailand want to be forgotten? I think they need to develop thicker skins, and accept that, yes, the coverage isn't very comfortable. And for those who don't like what we write, don't get so emotional about it. Actually, journalists are not, they're part of the dialogue, but there are many other factors that will decide what happens in Thailand, and they can afford to be a bit more relaxed. I think we should not be their priority. And it surprises me that they're focusing so much on foreign journalists and worrying so much about what foreigners are saying about Thailand. What matters in Thailand is the debate inside this country, and we, as foreigners, have a very limited role in that.